Hi there, my name is Kim McDonald, the host of this live stream everything to do with Fiona. We are online and we are on television. If you're watching on TV, we will continue to be live even during commercials. So you'll have to check us out online to continue the conversation. So we're going to be dipping in and out. Local forecasts will still come up here on television, but of course, different story if you are watching on one of our other platforms. We have many guests live in the field throughout the next hour. We have meteorologist Melinda Singh standing by. Fiona is a major storm. It has now recently weakened only slightly to a Category 3 hurricane. It's about 650 kilometers now, at least the eye of the storm, which is starting to wobble a bit. The eye of the storm is a bit disorganized, but it's 650 kilometers south of Nova Scotia. It is expected to be the strength of a Category 2 hurricane when it makes landfall. So what does that mean? Wind speeds 154 to 177 kilometers per hour, extensive wind damage, major roof and siding damage, and power outages can last several days to even weeks. So that will be for some areas of Nova Scotia, certainly, possibly Prince Edward Island too. A lot of variables to this storm, but Melinda Singh, we are here to really emphasize how powerful this storm is going to be and an impact on so many people.
100%, Kim. You know, we've seen hurricanes across Atlantic Canada, but we haven't seen anything quite as strong as Fiona. And unfortunately, when it makes its way onshore, it could potentially cause quite a bit of damage, flooding, power outages, and you just name it. So let's take a look at what's currently happening across Atlantic Canada. Here's a look at the current GO17 satellite imagery. So we are seeing the outer rain bands. That's moving in through Atlantic Canada, bringing in that rainfall a bit more earlier, but the strongest winds, the strongest waves, and the heaviest rainfall will make its way throughout the overnight and in through later Saturday. This is a current look at a bit more zoomed in look here at the current disorganized eye, like Kim mentioned. So we will continue to monitor that there for you as well. In terms of the winds, here's just a quick look at what we have seen thus far in terms of the strongest winds. We don't have data for Halifax, unfortunately, but Sable Island looking at 63 kilometers per hour, Gander as well, 59 for Charlottetown, but these winds will exceed over 100 kilometers per hour, Kim, as we continue in through the overnight and the early pre-dawn hours as Fiona continues to make its way inland. You know, Kim, we've been talking about the impacts. Here's a look at some of those as well. We've been seeing the potential for flooding, widespread flooding, rain. Some areas could even exceed over 200 millimeters of rainfall with Hurricane Fiona. And unfortunately, the storm is coming in during high tide, which is a bit more unfortunate as well.
Thank you, Melinda. We're going to bring in from our sister station, Meteo Media, we've got Patrick de Belfoy. He's in Île-de-la-Madeleine, or the Magdalen Islands, which are an archipelago in the St. Lawrence. They're part of the province of Quebec. And Patrick, this is an area that is expected to sustain a lot of damage. This is going to be problematic for anybody in this area. Tell me what you're seeing and what you're expecting.
Well, definitely it's going to be a problem because this is a very, very small bunch of islands. So small that, I mean, on the wide side, I think they're about 5 or 10 kilometers, not more than that, and about 40 to 60 on the long side. They're, of course, surrounded by water, but they're in the middle of it, and there's no frictions, so the winds do not slow down before they hit the islands. So we're expecting to see very strong winds, of course. Rain, not that bad, 50 to 70 millimeters for the whole event. The thing, though, the biggest problem these people have is erosion. Because for now, a couple of decades, every time a storm comes by, a part of the island is washed away. Now, they have put rocky dams over many parts to try to hold on to their land, but still, it goes away. And I've seen places today where the house is really right on the edge. If the waves are too strong, and they will be on this part, probably the house will go. So there is a stress for them, even though they're telling you, oh yes, well, you know, we are used to winds of 100 kilometers an hour, 110 kilometers an hour, happens about 20 to 25 times a year. Yes, But sustained winds more than 100 kilometers an hour for 6 to 8 hours, this could be a big problem. And the thing that really surprised me also, because this is my 8th hurricane that I cover, usually when I get there, plywood's everywhere, on the doors, on the windows, everywhere. Here, nothing was plywood, nothing. And you say, aren't you scared? And they go, well, we don't think that's going to be the problem. The problem, our houses are made different than the one in the cities. The windows are not the same one we use in the cities. The shingles on the roofs are not nailed like we have in our cities. They are glued one by one. So the structural integrity is not as fragile as ours. But of course, we are waiting to see if the rain's going to be a problem. And of course, the winds and the erosion.
And where are you staying, Patrick? Where's a safe space for you to be reporting from?
I'm just live right behind that camera. We're just out my room. But see, we're expecting actually the winds to pick up and bring that swell, that storm swell from this part, from just behind me. So probably in the middle of the night, around 3, 4 in the morning, there will be quite the sightseeing, shall I say.
Well, hopefully people will stay well inland. Not that there's a lot of inland to get to. It seems like there's shore almost everywhere when you're on the Magdalen Islands. Patrick, thank you so much for checking in with us, and we hope you stay safe through the overnight. I know you'll be reporting all night long, and through tomorrow we'll hear from you as well. So this is a look at what we can expect in the Magdalen Islands, or Île de la Madeleine as they call them in Quebec. Winds gusting to 125 kilometers per hour on Saturday morning. Prolonged periods of heavy rain, 100 to 150 millimeters plus. Possible wave heights vary between 8 and 12 meters in height. And of course, the storm surge, as Patrick was alluding to, we're going to be talking about erosion on these coastlines, a lot of damage and localized flooding as well. Melinda, this is just one of the areas that is being impacted by this storm. Of course, many folks around Atlantic Canada are certainly concerned.
You know, Kim, Patrick brought up a really good point of the sustained winds. You know, we see wind gusts upwards to 130 sometimes, especially across Atlantic Canada, but having winds at 130 just keep blowing on for 4 to 6 hours, that can definitely cause quite a bit of damage. But, you know, let's talk about how much rainfall we'll be looking at. On my screen here, I have our preliminary rainfall accumulation map. This is forecast models coming into our data. So we are looking at roughly 100 to 150 millimeters plus for areas north of Halifax, Sydney, Cape Breton, Charlottetown as well, areas in eastern Nova Scotia. We could locally be looking at 200 millimeters of rainfall as well. Even the Burgeo coast as well, 75 to 100 millimeters of rainfall. Western areas of New Brunswick will be looking at just some light rain. Still be looking at some stronger winds as well, but the rain threat will not be primarily issue for you. And into Labrador, we're looking at that rainfall, and we are looking at snowfall as well, Kim. We could be expecting roughly 5 to 10 centimeters with Hurricane Fiona as it makes its way northward into Labrador.
Can't believe we're also talking about snow with this storm on top of everything else. But yes, it's going to be cooler temperatures. We're not going to feel the tropical temperatures that we normally would with a storm like this. It's northerly wind for many people, and that's the reason why we're going to be seeing snow in the most northern locales. Here's a look at the tropical wind probability. This storm is massive in size, so it's going to be impacting areas hundreds of kilometers outside of the center of the storm.
Exactly, like areas like Corner Brook, Sydney, even many areas of eastern Nova Scotia. In fact, they're going to be looking at over those winds gusting upwards to 140, maybe even exceeding 150 kilometers per hour wind gusts as well. Let's play out the forecast in terms of what we could be looking at. So continuing into our evening hours, we did see some stronger winds today. They are going to start to ramp up as we get towards midnight, almost to 100 km per hour wind gusts, and then continuing as Hurricane Fiona starts to make landfall into the pre-dawn hours. We'll start to ramp up with those winds gusting upwards to 140, 145 as well. But I did mention areas like western New Brunswick. We'll see some strong winds, but not as strong as areas that are right over landfall. Areas like Burgeo as well, St. Lawrence looking at those stronger winds as well into the overnight.
Our storm chaser Jacqueline Whittle is in the field as well. We're going to go to Prince Edward Island. That's where she is stationed throughout the storm, where we're expecting winds gusting to 140 kilometers per hour on Saturday morning. Jacqueline is no stranger to covering storms like this, although it's been a few years, obviously, because of COVID. But Jacqueline, tell me what you're seeing and hearing ahead of this storm. It's already, it's picking up a little bit despite the fact that it's still hundreds of kilometers away.
Yeah, you bet, Kim. Nice to speak with both of you. We're looking at some rain that's starting to intensify, and the winds are all of a sudden picking up. It doesn't feel like much, but I can tell you that it's a little bit of a chilly breeze. So I can't imagine when 140-kilometer-an-hour gusts are coming out of the north. And I heard you speaking sort of off air here in the stream, about the snow that's attached to this. You get a deep trough like this behind the system that merges with a tropical system. You're bringing in colder air, as you said, and that's going to be lousy. So anybody that's out in any of these conditions, there's a lot of media out here covering it. It's going to be difficult that way. But aside from my situation, let's talk about the locals. You can see the big yacht behind me here. This has been brought in as a result of the storm, naturally, but that's a large craft. So somebody's actually put that on a trailer. We had a chance to speak to a couple pleasure craft boater owners that are actually, believe it or not, Kim, riding the storm out in their boat. Right behind me, actually, there's a little inlet here. So if you can imagine, like, Nova Scotia's this way and the north is this way, and so the winds are actually going to be kind of protecting, I should say the harbor is going to be kind of protecting the boats from the strong northerly winds. So they're actually tucked in there, and they're going to be sleeping in their beds in their boat. But like, they've been doing this for years, so they've ridden out things like Dorian and Ida and Larry, and of course Juan. Everybody talks about Juan here, Kim, and there's so much to get into. Where do you even begin, right?
Right, and we can compare this storm to Juan, but this is a much larger in scope storm. Juan obviously was a very powerful storm affecting a smaller area, but Fiona is going to touch many more people.
That's right. Purely based on the size of it, number one, the wind field is going to extend so far out from the center of the hurricane that even if you're nowhere near that eye and the center of the hurricane, you're still getting intense winds, including where we're at on PI. Now, I have a lot of concerns for, say, the north shore of PI because it's very flat. We're going to get a lot of piling up of that water, and that storm surge is going to be something to really write home about. And I hope people are taking that part of the storm seriously. It's one thing to have the winds, but that winds and the momentum around the hurricane, that counterclockwise flow bringing in that north wind, that's going to pile up that ocean water north of PEI for hours, just relentlessly piling up that water. So flooding, a main concern here because it is so flat. And then of course the trees. Downtown Charlottetown is so beautiful. We've been driving around. It reminds me a lot of a hurricane that I chased called Hurricane Florence in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was like this, a lot of old trees in the downtown core. And I'll tell you, it was a Category 1 storm. After that hurricane, there were a lot of trees down, and I mean old trees, a lot of damage. So I fear the worst. I hope I'm wrong. Lots of people are prepared. Lots of people have emergency kits prepared just in case they're without power for days. We also have emergency kits with us and food supplies, etc. But it feels like a Gulf of Mexico kind of landfall for us here on the east coast of Canada.
It does, and I'm glad we have your expertise out there and that you're not going in here out there with eyes closed. You've been through things like this before, but I don't know how many Maritimers have been through this kind of storm. I know that they're used to big storms, but this might top what they've seen in the past.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, these they don't make them any tougher, right, than Atlantic Canadians.
True.
And they would say that too. And you're right. They're no stranger to 100, 120 kilometer-an-hour gusts. Certainly here on PEI, Cape Breton Island, even more so. But when you talk about the duration of this event, and I know you guys have been probably hitting home on this for hours, and I want to reiterate it again. You get a hurricane that's Cat 2, Cat 3, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico or in Florida, and it rolls through rather quickly. Well, it's got real strong winds, but it's like a little, buzzsaw that goes through. This is going to be slow-moving, an extended wind field that can do damage over a long period of time. So a lot of people that have ridden out Dorian, for example, a couple years ago, it's like, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be in and out. This is going to be like you could be without power for many, many days. And it's going to be hard for emergencies officials to get on, restoring the grid, because the conditions could be bad for a long time. So, I mean, I don't want to be an alarmist. I just, I want to be prepared myself. And I've been talking to locals, and a lot of people seem they are prepared. They have got the messaging. They're taking it seriously.
And it's a good time to point out that people shouldn't be going out and assessing the damage on Saturday. They should still be hunkering down at least for one more day, because it's going to be very dangerous with those winds continuing. We could have projectiles, that kind of thing as well. Could be very dangerous. So yes, hang on there until at least Sunday. Jacqueline will continue to check in with you, of course. Thank you for your reporting, and please stay safe out there.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks, Kim.
You're welcome.
Here's a look at the power outage risk. As Jacqueline was talking there, the potential for power outages for days is possible with these definite strong winds across the area. So areas highlighted in pink on your screen, that is the most extreme risk in terms of the strongest winds, potentially looking at down trees as well, and even areas in yellow and orange and red as well, looking at those areas of seeing power outages continuing for the week. But like Kim mentioned, if you are at home in the Maritimes and Atlantic Canada, don't go out and assess the damage, because we could have debris still flying. Winds will still be gusty on Saturday. It's better to hunker down, stay indoors, and then if you would like to head outside on Sunday, carefully and safely as well. But let's take a look at the trough that Jacqueline was talking about. A trough swung over eastern Canada, impacted Ontario, Quebec, and then moved into Atlantic Canada. So with this trough, it perfectly aligned with Fiona. The trough is sweeping up Fiona into its mess, and it's bringing in that tropical moisture into Atlantic Canada. But like Jacqueline said, the winds are going to be coming out from the north. So that's why we are looking at more cooler conditions across the region, as well as snowfall for Labrador as well, Kim.
People get confused sometimes if they have maybe a tropical storm warning versus, say, a hurricane warning. It doesn't mean the storm has changed. It means that the location is what's impacting whether you have a tropical storm warning or a hurricane warning. So if you're farther away from the storm, you're likely under a tropical storm warning because you're experiencing tropical storm winds. Whereas if you're under a hurricane warning, you're more likely to experience those hurricane force winds. And this is a look between a watch and a warning. And let's talk about Cat 3s, Cat 2s. We mentioned that it's a Cat 3 now after being a Cat 4, but we expect it, Melinda, to be a Cat 2 when it makes landfall.
Yeah, Kim. So hurricanes love warm water. And when we get that warm water, we get the wind shear as well. They typically like to continue to spin. So what faster they spin, the faster their winds are, and that's how they indicate what category they are. Currently, it is a Category 3, potentially downgrading. When we looked at satellite earlier, it was a the eye wasn't as defined. It was more disorganized. So that means that the storm is weakening slightly. So winds will still be quite strong, but you can imagine sustained winds at 154 kilometers per hour, potentially even to 170 kilometers per hour as it makes a landfall into Nova Scotia.
Yeah, we don't want people to think, oh great, it's weakening, it won't be so bad. It's going to be bad. I mean, I don't know about you, Melinda, but if I go out and the winds are maybe 40 kilometers per hour, I can feel that. That is a gusty day. So when we're talking about 140 kilometers per hour, people won't be able to walk down the street potentially with this. And we've been emphasizing the fact that there are so many leaves on the trees this time of year. This is not like nor'easter season where the trees are bare. So that is going to be one of the problems that leads to those big outages. Here's a look too of where our hurricane warnings and tropical storm watches and warnings are.
Yes, we have many watches and warnings in effect, like you mentioned. So the areas in purple is the hurricane warning, and areas in pink is tropical storm warning. And across the Avalon and eastern Newfoundland is a tropical cyclone statement. And for areas of Labrador, a tropical storm watch is in effect. They'll be getting into the remnants of the storm later into Saturday and Sunday. We also do have rainfall warnings as well issued by Environment Canada, because we will be looking at devastating amounts of rainfall and strong winds as well, and not to mention the storm surge, Kim.
Okay, I believe we have Nathan Coleman now. Nathan Coleman is reporting out of Halifax for this storm, another area that's expected to be impacted. Now, Nathan, you're from the area. You didn't fly in for this. You live here. This is your home too, your family and friends, but you've been able to get out and about and talk to people ahead of this storm about prep. So can you give me a little bit of an idea of what you've been hearing and what you've been seeing?
Yes, and it is just miserable conditions out here at the moment, Kim. It's been rainy all day, but we've been warning this about this storm for the past week. And yesterday, the day before, I was interviewing residents who are out, stocking up on things like some extra groceries in case the power does go out, buying batteries, and boaters out at the marinas really securing their boats because of the potential threat for storm surge. So people have been really heeding the warnings. It's been very strong messaging, and this is only the beginning. It's been raining since the morning here because of that trough, but as we really feed into that tropical moisture, it's going to keep coming. We had an extremely dry summer, but off to a very wet start for fall, and as the winds pick up, it's really going to be a threat for all of the power lines with the full foliage, like you mentioned, on those trees. If it snaps off, I mean, there could be some widespread power outages here in Nova Scotia.
It's getting dark there. Nate, it's hard to see you now as the rain comes down. My goodness, this is early times too. We've got hours and hours of this storm before it's all over. I know Halifax is not going to be hit quite like one because it's just a little farther to the east from where we are expecting this storm to land, but it's still going to be a big storm, and I think that people in Halifax are aware of that. I know that you were out getting some gas, and what were the lineups like?
Yeah, there were some lineups for gas. People are filling up here, and transportation is really shut down. The buses shut down at 8:30 p.m. as well as the ferries. I'm standing on top of Citadel Hill, which is right next to the Scotiabank Centre. There should be a big Halifax Mooseheads hockey game tonight. Canceled tomorrow as well. So people are being forced to basically just stay home, and the Halifax waterfront itself even shut down. So they don't want people going out and gawking a bit because when the high tide hits with the wind, it's going to be very treacherous down there, and you don't want to get hit by a wave because there's going to be the threat of being pulled out with that rip current if you do stumble along the rocks. So stay away from the shoreline. You can stay inside, eat your storm chips if you stocked up on those. The chip shelves were definitely empty, Kim.
Yes, they know what to stock up. They know what supplies they need, and it's storm chips number one. Everything else is number two. Okay, thank you, Nathan. We'll let you go. Stay safe, and we'll be hearing from you throughout this storm. Nathan Coleman in Halifax, Nova Scotia, riding out the storm there. Of course, that is where Nathan lives. This is a storm that, this is the kind of weather he's used to covering. Wind gusts to 125 kilometers per hour on Saturday morning expected in Halifax. Prolonged periods of heavy rain, and it's already begun. They've already seen a lot of rain, but 100 to 150 plus millimeters possible. And again, those very high waves, plus the storm surge too. So a lot to be concerned about as the storm gets ever closer. Going to bring it back to Melinda Singh now, who's been watching this storm. You, along with everybody else, Melinda, here have been paying close attention to how this storm has been changing along the way. It's the first major hurricane of the Atlantic hurricane season, meaning a Category 3 or higher. It was a very quiet season to start, but now things are really ramping up. I believe we just have our 8th named storm in the Caribbean now, or in the Atlantic now. So, but Fiona is a biggie, and certainly one of the biggest to ever impact Eastern Canada.
Yes, good you mentioned that, Kim. Let's take a look at the current outlook of the Atlantic basin. So we have Tropical Fiona towards the north. Tropical Storm Gaston as well won't be impacting anyone, which is good news. Tropical Depression 9, which will be impacting portions of Jamaica, Cuba, and maybe into the United States later into the coming days. And we also do have Hermione as well. This is the tropical wave just beside Africa. So it is a ramping up in intensity, Kim, especially into the coming days. We'll be looking and tracking these into the coming days. But in terms of that track for that depression potentially impacting Cuba, and looks like it might be making its way into the Florida Keys, and this could be another major hurricane for the Atlantic coast. You know, Nathan mentioned the power outage risk. He also mentioned the wave heights. So currently, within the past 3 hours, we saw wave heights over 10 to 12 meters in height around the center of the eye of Fiona, and especially as that eye makes its way closer towards Atlantic Canada, we'll be seeing those types of waves over 8 to 12 meters in height. Right now we're looking at roughly 1 to 2 meters in height. We are going to be looking at high tide making its way in soon. Fortunately, that's coinciding with the arrival of Fiona as well. And we did talk about erosion. That's going to be one of the main factors, especially for Ile de la Madeleine, as well as Charlottetown and many areas within the coastal sections. But let's take a look once again, Kim, at the power outage risk here. We are looking at and tracking the potential for widespread flooding, as well as many downed trees, which can cause power outages, and this could potentially be lasting for days.
Yeah, people were heeding these warnings. They were getting ready for power outages, at least from what I could tell on social media and stories that I've been hearing from people. They have not been hoarding. They have not been greedy at the grocery store. Yes, the chip aisle is empty, as they do. But nobody was taking more than their fair share so that everybody could have something. But yes, this is one of those storms where if you rely on well water, you've filled up your bathtub, you have propane and hopefully a generator. I know a lot of people do have generators because of storms like these and the big nor'easters that Atlantic Canada gets in the winter time. The good news is the temperatures will be cool with this, yes, but they won't be hot like it would be in the middle of July if you lose your power and you have no AC and it's just cooking. And it's not going to be like a nor'easter in January if you lose your power and you could freeze and your pipes could freeze, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just trying to find a silver lining on this when you do, I'm assuming when you do lose your power with this. So we're talking about things like candles and flashlights. And if you have candles, of course, be safe with them. Never bring a barbecue inside. People might want to do that, bring it into their garage or into their home if they lose power and they're trying to find a way to cook. That's very dangerous, of course, because of carbon monoxide. I'm hoping I don't need to remind people, but just in case I do. So yes, we are expecting power outages. It's more of a when and not if. And the only question really is how many people will lose power, not if people will lose power, Melinda.
Exactly, Kim. Let's take a look right now at the current conditions. A bit more cooler. We're starting to see a bit more of the cooler winds making its way in. 11 degrees currently in Charlottetown, seeing that rainfall. I did mention that's the outer rain bands of Fiona already making its way in. So heavy rainfall has already started in areas of the maritime provinces, and we'll continue to see that more intense, heavier rainfall into the pre-dawn hours of Saturday.
Okay, we have our storm chaser, Mark Robinson, in the field as well. He's in Cape Breton, and we're expecting wind gusts of 140 kilometers per hour by Saturday morning. Prolonged periods of heavy rain, 100 to 150 millimeters, maybe even more. And then wave heights will vary between 8 and 12 meters. That does not include the storm surge, which may be 1 to 2.5 meters. So yes, a lot to talk about here. Mark, I'm not sure where you're located right now. I know you've been moving around the island a little bit. I'm glad you're nice and bright in your yellow raincoat so we can all see you. But tell me, since you've been there, what have you been seeing? What are you anticipating?
Well, Kim, yes, I actually wore the yellow raincoat so you can see me if the power does go out right away, but I don't think it's going to. So far, pretty resilient people here on the island on Cape Breton. I'm in Lewisburg, so I'm right down on the water. So in the area that's likely to get hit with the strongest winds, as you were saying, 140 kilometer an hour gusts, maybe even higher than that. We don't quite know. This is going to be a massive wind field as it comes in across the island, and we we are anticipating that's going to be coming in the early hours. So far, though, everybody's getting prepared. I've talked to a few people around. They've said, oh, yeah, we've been through this before. I think we're going to be okay. This one sounds a little bit more serious than some of the other ones we've had, so we're going to take it seriously. We're going to stay inside. And the housekeeper at the hotel here said, hey, I'm probably not going to come and clean your hotel room in the morning. I said, you stay inside. You don't come and clean our place. You just make sure you're safe.
That's right. That's what we're encouraging people to do, to stay in even on Saturday, because it's such a long-lasting storm, Mark, it's not going to ease really quickly. This is not going to be a fast mover.
Yeah, quite often when I'm here for these kinds of storms, the storms are moving parallel to this coast, so they sort of go scooching by, and the whole thing is done in 3 hours. This one's coming in perpendicular to the coast, and it's actually going to slow down. So this one's going to feel a little bit more, almost like a tropical hurricane, because it's not moving at those very, very rapid speeds that we quite often see up here in the northern part of the Atlantic.
Oh, that's true. That's a great comparison. I know you've been through many a hurricane, and I'm not going to ask you to compare this one now. We can ask you that after you've been through it, and then you'll have a better sense of what this is like versus others that you have been through. I was hearing that they were opening a community center for those people whose homes may not be able to withstand a storm like this. In Sydney, the mayor of Sydney was saying something like that. But I've also heard that that's because of people without homes. So the homeless, the houseless people on the streets, they need somewhere to go in something like this.
Yeah, I've actually, it's funny that you bring that up because I did see a couple of homeless people when we were in Halifax, and I immediately thought back to another hurricane, Hurricane Michael in Florida. When Jacqueline and I were there, we actually encouraged a homeless family to please leave the beach area and go find shelter, inside, way back up in a proper shelter, because they were planning just to ride it out on the beach. And I said, you won't survive. We're not talking about a hurricane up here that's going to wipe out communities, but it's definitely going to do damage. So if you need help, please go and get it. Do not sort of be, say, oh, I can handle this on my own. Please go and get that help. Go to the shelter if you need to. And if you're concerned about your home, don't stay. This is the time. We've just got a little bit of time right now where you can potentially get to a shelter if you are concerned about your home, because getting emergency services out to you is going to be difficult. I don't want to say that they won't be able to, but it is going to be difficult.
Yeah, and it's going to be difficult for those people who work trying to get power back on as well. Those workers are going to have a very tough time. So Saturday, because it's going to continue to be as windy as we expect it to be, even when the winds are easing, we're still talking 70 to 90 kilometers per hour. Though it's just too dangerous for hydro workers to get your power back on, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've actually seen a bunch of the cherry pickers go by, like the hydro trucks with the big crane and the bucket on top. We've seen a bunch of those headed towards Sydney when we were driving from Halifax over to Sydney. So they're anticipating already. They're getting people into position. But until that wind goes down below a certain level, you are not going to get those people out. Because again, keep in mind, that bucket has to go fairly high up, and the higher up you go, the stronger the winds are. So you might not feel it too much at the ground, but 10 meters up where those buckets are, it might be blowing 70, 80 kilometers an hour. So don't be surprised even if you think it's slow enough that people should be getting your power back on, it may not be. It may not be safe for them, and we want to make sure that everybody's safe, and not just people that are riding out in their homes. The people that have to work and get everything back up and running, they need to be safe as well.
That's right. Okay, a lot of good points here, Mark, especially that people have a little bit of time still to prepare as much as they can for prolonged outages and bringing things in from around their yards as well. Okay, thank you, Mark. I know you'll be covering this storm from beginning to end, and we look forward to hearing your information later on. Thank you.
No problem. My pleasure, Kim.
Storm hunter Mark Robinson in Lewisburg in Cape Breton right now. Let's talk about sea surface temperature and how this plays a role in how powerful a storm is.
Yeah, Kim, down in the Atlantic near the Caribbean islands, sea surface temperatures are quite warm, into the high 20s, mid 30s, and we've been seeing as the years progress, with climate change as well, the ocean temperatures are getting warmer, and typically this year, since it's a La Nina year as well, we've been seeing warmer temperatures closer to the Atlantic provinces. And this is one of the reasons why it helped to fuel Hurricane Fiona and kept its strength as currently a Category 3 storm, and why it's impacting the Maritimes to becoming a Category 2 potentially at landfall. So it carried the storm and its atmospheric conditions all the way into the cooler Atlantic waters, but as it gets into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we'll start to see more of that disorganization, the storm slowly ripping apart. But like Mark said, it's moving perpendicular to the Maritimes, not directly over it. So it will have a bit more of a different feel as we continue later into the coming hours. And especially as we get into, the cooler air. I did mention earlier, but some viewers may have missed it. Areas like Labrador will be seeing some snowfall with this storm.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. They don't get that in the Carolinas or the Caribbean or Florida. They don't see this on the back end of their storms.
No, that's because we're tapping into a lot of cooler Arctic air. I did show this product earlier, but it's such a good product to highlight the exact trajectory of the storm. So it's tapping into a trough that moved across, pretty much moved all the way from the west coast into the east coast, and it tapped into Fiona's energy, and pretty much it's helping to steer it into Atlantic Canada, but it's also bringing in those cooler airs. And I believe it was Jacqueline who mentioned it's a bit nippy outside, and with those winds, you can definitely get into the cooler temperatures as well. So temperatures will be a bit cooler, and the winds as well not helping. I feel more like a wind chill, so to say, Kim, with this one.
A wind chill with a hurricane. Very interesting. That's what happens when you get these kinds of storms in Canada, I suppose. But we did have an extraordinarily warm summer across the eastern half of the country. That helped too with the warming of the ocean. And honestly, it's very interesting and very unusual to see a storm hang on to this strength this far north, as you were mentioning. The waters are very warm just off the coast of Nova Scotia. You don't have to be that far south to have those 20 degrees Celsius waters, which is unusual. And the reason why people say, well, usually it just weakens by the time it gets to Atlantic Canada. We talk about extratropical and we talk about tropical storms, and we can get hit a lot in the Maritimes and Newfoundland. But to have a strong storm like a 1, a Category 2, and like a Fiona, a little different. So, and we know that it's the warm waters that really feed these storms, that strengthen these storms. And that's why we talk about how warm the water is. Maybe people don't know that correlation between the sea surface temperature and the strength of the hurricane.
Yeah, Kim, basically we have all these ingredients for a hurricane, and that's typically the number one ingredient. We need those warmer waters to help sustain a hurricane. But let's dive into the precipitation forecast. Many viewers are waiting to see this. So as we head into our Friday evening, we already seen that rainfall. That's the outer rain bands moving in. We'll continue to see that in through the coming hours. And then Hurricane Fiona will make its landfall into pre-dawn Saturday, still bringing in heavy rainfall. That's when we'll start to see those flooding rains as well. We could be looking at over 50 to 100 millimeters per hour as well, Kim. And that's when we'll see the strongest winds as well. Lighter rainfall Saturday morning across Newfoundland. I did mention western New Brunswick won't be seeing quite the rainfall, but still areas across PEI into the Madeline Islands as well. And then as we head into our Saturday afternoon, we'll start to see that rainfall diminish for areas like Halifax and New Glasgow as the storm continues to track northward, impacting Labrador and Quebec. Looking at the rainfall for the eastern half and snowfall for the western half.
Okay, let's take a look back at the history of Fiona, because it has impacted a few countries before it came our way. Take a look.
Long before Hurricane Fiona set its sights on Atlantic Canada, it was causing destruction in the Caribbean. On September 15th, Tropical Depression 7 strengthened to a tropical storm and was assigned the name Fiona. 2 days later, it had become a hurricane, one that was headed straight for Puerto Rico. It made landfall with wind speeds of 140 kilometers per hour and knocked out power to most of the island. One rain gauge recorded 796 millimeters of rain. Roads were stripped of pavement, roofs torn off, and nearly 1 million residents were left without drinking water. Early reports indicated that 8 people were killed. U.S. President Joe Biden declared a state of emergency. On September 19th, the eye of the storm passed over the Dominican Republic. It was the first hurricane to make landfall in that country in 18 years. Between 200 and 400 millimeters of rain fell, and a state of emergency was declared for the hardest hit provinces. At least 2 people were killed there. Fiona continued north and picked up strength over the warm waters of the Caribbean, becoming a Category 3 storm by September 20th, making it the first major hurricane of the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. The eye of the storm passed over the Turks and Caicos Islands, dumping heavy rain and causing flooding before strengthening again to a Category 4 as it chugged towards Bermuda, with its sights eventually set on Atlantic Canada.
We're going to bring Mark Robinson back into the storytelling in just a moment. And it's interesting because, Melinda, when we're talking about Fiona as a Category 1 storm, it had devastating impacts on Puerto Rico and on the Dominican Republic as a Cat 1. So people can't get all wrapped up in, well, if it's a Category 5, I need to be worried, but if it's a Category 1, not so much, because it doesn't really matter.
Quite a bit of damage as well. You know, Puerto Rico saw flooding, they had widespread power outages, and that was just at a Category 1, like you just mentioned. So you can only imagine the strength that the storm has gotten from the Atlantic waters as it moved just near Bermuda, and then it's continuing to make its way through. Currently, it's at a pressure at 940 millibars. This is a barometric pressure, and we could potentially be beating our all-time record. The lowest pressure we have seen in Atlantic Canada or in Canada as a whole is 940.2, and that was from a nor'easter back in 1977. So just a cool stat that we could potentially be looking at with Hurricane Fiona, as it is a very historic hurricane making its way in, Kim.
Yeah, the lowest pressure on record potentially ever. And that 940 stat was from January. So that was from a nor'easter. But this could be, I mean, there's a lot of predictions of what the low will be when it crosses over, but if it's in the 930s, then we're certainly breaking all-time records. And that's going to be, I mean, when we talk about pressure, we're talking about the strength of a storm as well. So the lower the pressure, the stronger the storm. We're going to go now to Cape Breton, where we have Mark Robinson. Cape Breton expected to be one of the hardest hit areas in the Atlantic provinces as the storm rolls over. Mark, it already seems like things are picking up there. What's your plan?
Well, you know, Kim, right now our plan is to try to stay as dry as possible because the main part of the storm is going to be coming through a little closer to dawn. And you literally caught it just as a convective band pushed through the area. So you watch the rains pick up. But I've been watching the radar behind that convective band. There's almost nothing for quite a while. But the eye itself is beginning to show up on long distance radar just a little bit. And that big empty space is very, very ominous as it's beginning to, that's basically saying the hurricane is now close enough we can see it on radar. And that's definitely something that everybody has to now begin to take seriously. Your preparations for the hurricane should be complete by now. And at this point, time to just go inside, hunker down, get your storm chips and a warm drink because Fiona is going to be making its way into Nova Scotia very soon.
And people hopefully have their phones charged. Maybe that's the way you're communicating, because I know, Mark, you will be tweeting. The Weather Network will have our app ready and up and going, and we'll be continuing to cover this story all night long. So if people lose power, make sure that your phone is charged, and you can always charge it in your car. Not that I'm saying go outside. If you have to stay inside and just ride it out. But I know people are always wanting to know what's happening now, so that's a good way to find out. And Mark, tell me if you agree with me. I feel like if it rains early like it has with this storm, even if it has nothing to do with the actual hurricane, it makes people get to work and start to do what they need to do once they start seeing some weather, versus if it was just quiet, not windy, maybe they'd be less inclined to get moving.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had essentially a trough. It was just like a cold front that was coming through that I actually chased thunderstorms in Ontario a few days ago. Same cold front had finally made it to the Maritimes, and people were already saying, oh, this must be the edge of the hurricane. Oh, I better get ready now. And so I think people were, getting ready a little bit ahead of time, but also the messaging that we at the Weather Network have been doing for, quite a few days, saying, hey, this one is a serious one. We have to, you can't just sort of blow this one off and say, oh, it's not going to be too bad. You do have to take it seriously. And that's what I've seen. Like, I was in the grocery store talking to people in there, and they were saying, oh yeah, we're getting all ready. We're not scared, but this one sounds like it might be worse than the other ones we've seen. So we're getting ready. But one thing about the Maritimes, people in East Coast, everyone's being very polite to each other. Here, you come in the line. Oh, I'm not going to take the last chips on you. Here, you take these chips. I'll just take one bag. So that was the one thing I love seeing, especially when it comes to these major weather events, is people being good to each other.
Well, that's very typical. I was speaking with my cousin. She's in Sydney, and she is a 911 operator, and she was at home, and a friend stopped by when I was talking to her on the phone, and she said that person was not prepared for the storm, and she needed her help, so she made an emergency kit for her and sent her on her way. So she's like, here, I got everything you need, and she said, okay, great, thank you. And that's how people are in Cape Breton, people helping people, which is wonderful. And you know what, you're right. We don't want people to be scared. We want them to be prepared. We're not here to hype a storm. We're here to talk about the potential danger of it. And we want people just to know what's up so that they'll be ready.
Yeah, I mean, we try not to hype it, but we want people to be aware that this storm could be pushing winds upwards of 140 kilometers an hour. At that speed, shingles begin to come off. That's airborne debris. So, you can't see it, but there's the hotel that we're staying in is sort of behind the camera right now. If we have shingles coming off, they're going to hit the windows over here. If those windows were hit and those windows break and go in, that's now flying pieces of glass. So even if the whole roof doesn't come off, if we're not seeing the kind of damage that we often see on places like, the Gulf Coast down in Florida and Texas, it's still going to be dangerous. Flying debris, whether you're in Florida or in Nova Scotia, is, the same thing everywhere. It's going to do injury. You want to make sure you're inside and safe as possible, because I don't want to see anybody hurt by this storm.
No, exactly. That's the whole point. That's why we're here. That's why we're live. And that's why you are there as well. And we appreciate that you are. Thanks, Mark, for your contributions. Again, Mark Robinson will be following this storm all night long out of Cape Breton, one of the areas that we suspect will be hardest hit by this storm. Strong winds gusting to 140 kilometers per hour on Saturday morning, prolonged periods of rain. We're talking about flash floods, flooding rains at the very least, and wave heights between 8 and 12 meters, and then storm surge as well. And for wave heights, I know people get attracted to storms. They want to go take a closer look at them. That's the last thing we want you to do. This is going to be very dangerous at the coastline. I'm going to bring in Melinda again. Melinda, this storm is going to last for hours, which makes it a little bit different than most storms that roar through Atlantic Canada.
Yeah, Kim, it's going to be making its way in through the coming hours, potentially making landfall as we head into the early pre-dawn hours, like Mark said. But as we get closer to landfall, we'll still continue to see those strong gusty winds. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pull that graphic up because it just shows the intensity of the winds and how impactful the storm will be. We're already seeing those winds gusting 50 to 60, 70 kilometers per hour throughout the evening. And that's nothing compared to what we will be seeing, especially for portions of PEI, southwestern Newfoundland, and eastern Nova Scotia. As we head towards midnight, we'll start to get into the 100 range, upwards to 120 kilometers per hour, and especially as the eye of the storm makes its way over Nova Scotia, we'll be looking at those winds ramping up upwards to 140 kilometers per hour. And these are, sustained winds. So definitely going to be causing quite a bit of damage. Like Mark said, debris will be flying everywhere, trees as well, branches as well. So we'll continue to see these winds into Saturday morning as well. The eye of the storm will be making its way over the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, but as we head into the afternoon, Sydney will still be looking at 120 km/h wind gusts, even the Berkshire coastline as well. We'll start to get out of the stronger winds later Saturday evening into the overnight, especially for the maritime provinces, getting back into the normal range of 50 to 70 km/h wind gusts, and the majority of the storm will be breaking up over the St. Lawrence, but then impacting Labrador and Quebec later into our Saturday overnight into our Sunday.
Yeah, and Western Newfoundland is going to get those winds as well. It'll last a little bit longer there. I mean, just because they'll show up a little bit later and then keep on going through Saturday as well, even into Sunday, I believe, for Western Newfoundland.
Yes, winds will continue into the afternoon.
Okay, people in New Brunswick, we're getting lots of questions. What about here? What about there? When we look at that map, we're still seeing places that are far from that middle of the storm, far from the eye of the storm, and they're still seeing 70, 80 km/h gusts, as far away as you can get in the Maritimes, really, from that storm. So they're still getting stormy weather. It might not be as damaging as what you might see in, say, Port Hawkesbury or Antigonish. However, this is still going to be a storm that you're going to have to be careful, even if you're in western areas of New Brunswick.
Previous storms that I've been looking at the past couple of days, like Dorian and Juan, some of those storms brought just heavy rainfall, and some of them only brought heavy winds. Fiona will be bringing the strong wind gusts as well as the flooding potential for heavy rainfall. So looking at our forecast, we are forecasting upwards to 150 millimeters of rainfall for Halifax, Sydney, Charlottetown, many areas of northeastern sections of Nova Scotia, and even the Berkshire coast and Corner Brook into the 75 to 100 millimeter range. So it is going to be definitely packing quite a punch, especially across those areas that I just mentioned, and even into Labrador. Heavy rainfall upwards to 75 millimeters for the eastern section. For the western section, the more inland areas, they'll be tapping into more cooler temperatures, so getting into that snowfall, the dreaded S word that we don't like to say too often, too early in fall, Kim.
No kidding. We're talking about snowfall, my goodness, with a hurricane. So this is something you wouldn't see if this storm was hitting Florida or the Carolinas or the Caribbean islands. So this is unique to us because of that cold northerly air and the fact that we are now into late September. And here's our power outage one last time, because this is important too, where we expect to have extreme power outages. And in more rural communities, Melinda, like the areas in the pink are where the extreme risk is, but the more rural communities may be out of power for a longer period of time. That's what tends to happen. It happened with Dorian. There were people without power for 9 days. And there are people right now in Puerto Rico. Of course, it's a different infrastructure, but in Puerto Rico, they're still without power after the storm went through days ago.
Exactly, Kim. And while you were just talking about that, I wanted to mention the temperatures. So Saturday morning, temperatures will be into the single digits across many areas of Atlantic Canada. A bit warmer across the east coast of Newfoundland, still getting into 19 degrees for Gander. But with those winds, especially coming out from the north, that's why temperatures are going to be quite cooler. Let's take a look at the afternoon. Not that big of a difference, still going to be quite chilly, especially with the wind chill. So that's why we're going to be, it'll be 11 in Charlottetown, but feeling closer like 6. So have your sweaters on, have your winter jacket on, but still, if you are in the area, stay indoors for your Saturday, potentially make your way out for Sunday, where the majority of the storm will be out of the Maritimes.
Yeah, this is going to be pretty miserable with that heavy rain, those strong winds, the fact that it's going to feel cooler than average. Temperatures will feel like the single digits. So We are so happy that you joined us here on our live stream. We're encouraging everyone who will be impacted by this hurricane to lay low, stay safe. I'm hoping that you're prepared now, and we will continue to cover the storm until it's all over. Here at the Weather Network, it is our #1 story and our #1 priority. So please check back with us for more information.